You're watching Live Now from Fox. My name is Christy Matino. If you are just joining us, we're following this breaking news out of Venezuela as the U.S. has struck Venezuela. And we do know the country's leader, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife have been flown out of the country. And you're taking a live look there at Venezuela right now as supporters of Maduro are in the streets this morning. I wanted to bring in an expert here to break down all of this for us. Michael Szanto, he's an expert on international affairs and foreign policy. He joins us live on Live Now from Fox right now. Thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time. We do appreciate you jumping on here this morning.
You're very welcome, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right, well, let's start with this. Help us understand the scale of this, because really, how significant is it for the U.S. to carry out a large-scale strike and reportedly capture a sitting foreign president?
Well, of course, there's a precedent and not too far away with Panama and Noriega, who was also an indicted drug dealer. So I think that the indictments that were reached in 2020 helps a lot in terms of legality and legitimacy in terms of carrying out this operation. Maduro's been a horrible problem. He's oppressing his people. The people are starving to death. He's aligned with our enemies, Russia, China, Iran. So this is definitely very helpful for the United States and the region.
I want to recap what has happened overnight, because this is a developing story, as I've been sharing with our viewers. We're getting information in here by the second, really, but we do have this video that we have gotten in here. Break down for us what appears to have actually happened overnight there in Venezuela.
From what I understand right now, the capture of Maduro and his wife was through Delta Force, which, of course, is an elite unit of the United States military, U.S. Army. It's comparable to the Navy SEALs who killed bin Laden, and it's a perfect operation. I believe it actually was Delta Force, interestingly enough, who did a rescue mission of American who was in prison in Panama, again in Latin America. So it perfectly conducted operation. Maduro and his wife captured alive. They will stand trial. Well, he will, at least, for his crimes. I don't know that his wife was indicted. I don't think she was, but I would have to verify it. So it was a very successful military operation. Hopefully, no civilians died. Unfortunately, tragically, there may have been, collateral deaths, and that's very, very sad. But the amount of suffering in Venezuela has been terrible. People are starving to death. This is a horrible dictatorship. We could have, for example, Russian nuclear weapons in Venezuela, like a Cuban Missile Crisis type situation. Although at this point, from what we know, there hasn't been a complete change of regime. So the fugitive, who is an indicted drug dealer, Maduro, has been captured. He will stand trial, but we haven't yet necessarily removed that regime, and that would be helpful. We have a Nobel Prize winning woman who's the legit president of Venezuela. Hopefully, they will allow her to take her rightful place. It's too early to know. But at this point, we can say it has been an incredibly well implemented military operation to capture an indicted drug dealer.
I wanted to talk about what we're learning here on social media from lawmakers, because we've heard from several of them posting to X saying Secretary of State Marco Rubio has briefed them on this. And I wanted to share this post here with our viewers. This is from Mike Lee, as he said he got off the phone with Secretary Rubio. He was informed that Nicolas Maduro has been arrested by U.S. personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the U.S. But he goes on to say here, and this is a question that I think some people may have here, did this action likely fall within the president's inherent authority? Because Mike Lee is saying he believes it does under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect U.S. personnel. But we've also heard from other lawmakers saying that this has to go through Congress to authorize a strike like this. Are you able to weigh in on that for our viewers?
It's a little bit of a tricky issue, because if you look at the precedent with the arrest and capture of Noriega, where we actually were able to do an invasion, the United States was a little bit under attack, which is bizarre, but true. Our troops had been attacked by Noriega, who was a thug, by his forces. We had certain issues related to the Panama Canal Treaty and our defense of Panama Canal. So there was some other pre-existing reasons that could have made that operation legal. It was still a little bit controversial, but that got a good result. if actually the thugs who are aligned with Noriega step aside, then this operation would have militarily been even more successful, because it doesn't appear like it's involved the tens of thousands of troops that we had to rapidly move into Panama, and we already had troops already in our existing base. So the legality issue is a little bit in a murky area, maybe a little bit questionable. I have actually personally been a critic of the targeting of those ships, because the people on the ships are not indicted, certainly not convicted. And in fact, the operations, and this honestly kind of has horrified me, appeared aimed at killing the people on the ships. And I found that shocking, especially given that it would be very easy for our Coast Guard and Navy to detain the people. And I was shocked and horrified that they seem to be designed to kill the people. There's a deterrent effect for sure, but we don't know who these people are necessarily. Innocent, confused people, whoever, desperate people. And we were losing out on the law enforcement intelligence that we could get by capturing. So this has been very targeted, and it's a legitimate operation in the sense that Maduro is indicted. That gives a little bit of legal justification. And he's a brutal, terrible dictator. So it is definitely the right place to go. Under the War Powers Act and under the U.S. Constitution, it is a legitimate question to ask. And it could become a Pandora's box if we give license to a president doing whatever they want militarily around the world. What is coming back to haunt Trump is in President Trump. I apologize, sorry, it's still early in the morning. What's coming back to haunt President Trump is he began this term, and this is bizarre, but this is the truth, seemingly to threaten to possibly take some kind of military action against our closest allies like Canada, Denmark, in terms of Greenland. So that also creates a knee-jerk reaction. I think that President Trump often suffers from this. When you say a lot of, frankly, crazy things, and even seemingly try to do strange things, bringing combat troops to Los Angeles and Chicago without any conceivable law enforcement or military purpose, and seemingly maybe to be oppressive. And when you're saying things that are not acceptable, you create a knee-jerk reaction. And then you create a lot of pressure within the Democratic Party base. But I think even outside of politics, reasonable people start to have a knee-jerk reaction against you. And I would not be honest if I didn't say things that seemingly threaten Canada to the point that the Canadians literally got alarmed. Same with Denmark. Those kind of statements and actions create an environment where it's not even politics. People just come to the wrong assumption. And I think that that's going to some extent, increase the opposition. President George H.W. Bush did get some criticism, as I remember, with the invasion of Panama. I was a little kid at the time, but I remember it. But, it was very successful. Maduro is a much bigger problem than Noriega was. He is aligned with the Iranians. He is aligned with the Russians and Chinese. So we're talking about him being aligned with two major hostile nuclear powers, Russia and China, and aligned with what has been, since the early 80s, the largest sponsor of terror, Iran, under Khamenei, who we should hope is also on his way out, God willing, because of the number of deaths, including Arabs and Iranians. And that was the story that I was expecting to talk about on TV, and we have this development. And by the way, this is another positive element to this. This sends a powerful message to the Iranian government, to the thugs that are killing their own people in Iran, that the United States can come to the defense of the people. And I need to add, this illustrates how incredibly effective the U.S. military is. It is the most powerful, effective force in the world. And I will also add, this is America at her best when we're on the side of democracy and freedom. And that's where we should be standing today.
And there's so many unanswered questions here. And you touched on this a little bit. Who's running the country right now? And I wanted to give a live look right now at supporters of Maduro live in the streets there. This is a live look coming out of Venezuela. For our viewers just tuning in, Venezuela's government did respond to this attack with a call to action. They said, people to the streets. The government calls on all social and political forces in the country to activate mobilization plans, calling this an imperialist attack. My question for you, Michael, what comes next here?
You know, it's difficult to say, though. So because you do have apparently the military leadership, unfortunately, and regime holding power, even though they lost the election, they're not the legitimate government. It is hard to say what comes next. Now, if this does lead to a transition, which unfortunately might not, but let's hope that it does, then this has been incredibly successful. And in fact, this kind of shows what could have been a far safer approach in Iraq, where we took out Saddam Hussein, we captured him, even killed him if necessary, like with bin Laden, because, you know, we were more in an active war with Saddam Hussein's forces than, you know, in this case with Maduro. But it's hard to say what's going to come next. We don't really know. I think there is hope, but there's a lot of uncertainty. It could require, even if necessary, and I think it would be justified, bribing the right people. It could be giving some sort of amnesty, working out a deal where we promise not to prosecute people. So we can see if we're able to work out a deal, if we're able to capture other people, it would certainly be worth it. Very targeted strikes against regime and military targets, if we can minimize civilian casualties, if that could get this regime out. Now, people are going to say that Iraq had a civil war. The United States did too, but that was horrific. Many people dead, and chaos in Libya. The difference is those two countries, particularly Libya, and then you can throw in Afghanistan, had civil societies that had either unraveled or possibly in Afghanistan never formed. There should still be enough civil society in Venezuela that we won't see what we saw in Libya and Afghanistan. So, because people use those examples, and I never expected at the time in 2003 the U.S. would launch a massive invasion because it was very dangerous, particularly in the Islamic world. There are a lot of historical precedent, unfortunately, in Latin America over the last century or longer of insurgencies, guerrilla wars. We wouldn't want that for the suffering of the people. We certainly wouldn't want to get dragged into it. When Americans say they don't want regime change, that is because they remember very long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's very understandable. That is not going to happen. That's not what we want. And we definitely don't want a Libya situation, chaos. We want a stable, prosperous, but also friendly Venezuela.
Another question for you, because we did share this post a short time ago here from Attorney General Pam Bondi, as she shared this to social media, saying Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been indicted. In the Southern District of New York, Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States, going on to say they will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. She goes on to thank the entire U.S. DOJ. She says, I would like to thank President Trump for having the courage to demand accountability. But I wanted to just talk about a portion of that, the beginning there, because we also do know Maduro was indicted in 2020 in New York, but it was not previously known that his wife had been. How does Maduro's 2020 indictment in New York factor into the legal justification for this operation, or does it not?
It does. I mean, because an indictment against Noriega was one of the major justifications for the invasion of Panama. It's extremely important. And I think that makes this operation one of the things that justifies it, as well as the fact that Maduro was defeated in elections. He is not the legitimate leader. And as I said, he's aligned with hostile powers. But the fact that they're using an indictment through a grand jury shows that they're doing this to a large extent in the right way, through legal mechanisms. And they captured them alive, and they will stand trial, and they will have a fair trial. They are going to have attorneys of their choice. and they'll probably have vigorous defense. And I don't suspect that Maduro has very good odds here. He will almost certainly be convicted, and he will spend many, many years in the U.S. prison, which is where he belongs, for being a drug dealer, for the crimes committed against his own people. Of course, there are jurisdictional issues, but the U.S. has jurisdiction over the drug dealing, and the precedent is well established. I don't believe there's any controversy in the U.S. court system. And, I would be a critic of the fact that President Trump is not respectful, frankly, of our judicial system. But here he is working with our judicial system. And I think that some of the most successful things that President Trump has done on occasion are cases where U.S. policy has been consistent. It's not really a break with the Biden administration in terms of indicting Maduro, seeking his removal from power, seeking restoration of democracy, but perhaps a little bit having the guts to do something that isn't actually dangerous, risky, or costly to the United States. This also happened with moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Multiple presidents since Bill Clinton had promised to move the embassy. The U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, actually both houses, repeatedly, nearly all universally supported moving that embassy. The last resolution by the U.S. Senate, I forget the year, was like 90-1 that the United States should move the embassy. But every president before Donald Trump was too afraid to do that. They mistakenly thought that there would be dangerous consequences. So occasionally, and I don't want to play luck, because there a lot of times when presidents are afraid of doing something, there's a very good reason. But I think that's what is playing out here. Trump had the guts to do this, and sometimes that can be a good thing. But if you think about it analytically, what are the risks here? The Venezuelans do not have significant military forces. The United States is very powerful. This is practically a backyard. The Venezuelans have U.S. fighter jets from the 70s, which have not properly been maintained. Virtually impossible when the United States and Europeans and our Asian allies oppose that particular government. The people despise Maduro. They voted very, very substantially against him. So the risks are low, and the risks of allowing Maduro to stay in power were not zero to the United States because of their alignment with hostile powers, Russia, China, Iran, and the other side benefit. And I think this is a personal thing for our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is the Venezuelans do a lot to support the dictatorship in Cuba, which is very personal for Marco Rubio because his family fled that brutal, horrible dictatorship. And he was along a senator of the state of Florida, where Cuban exiles and refugees are a large part of what was his constituency. So the risk to the United States wasn't great of doing this operation. Now, the challenge is, fortunately, we're not seeing, God forbid, chaos or instability. The challenge is this regime could continue on, and we could have another thug, basically, another criminal. So that's the challenge. And then that starts to feel a little bit like unfinished business. But at least Maduro will stand trial, which is what he deserves.
And Michael, I know I've had you on here for quite a bit, but we do have a large number of viewers who are now just tuning in the 8 o'clock hour. So I would like you to stay on if you can here. And just to recap for us, I wanted to share this post here from President Trump, because right now we just know that Maduro and his wife have been captured, flown out of the country. A question we have, we don't know the whereabouts. However, President Trump has posted here that there will be a press conference at Mar-a-Lago. That's going to happen at 11 a.m. Eastern time. What questions do you have, Michael, and what can we expect at this press conference? What can President Trump share about this, and what can't he share to the public?
There may be some operational details that he can't share. It's not completely clear if all military operations are completely wrapped up. Certainly, if there's anything the United States military needs to continue to do, it's very important the president and everyone else keeps the integrity of the operations. Today, we've seen an incredibly successful military operation. I understand that was done by our Delta Force to capture the president, the legal president, because he was defeated by election, Maduro and his wife, and now they will stand trial. It was an excellent operation by all indications, executed very well. Maduro and his wife faced indictments in the United States, so there was legal justification, and it's very nice to see that at the very least, this dictator that has caused a lot of suffering, who's been oppressive, who's subverted Venezuelan democracy, at least he will face justice. What I think we should like to see is that democracy is restored to Venezuela. And that would allow democratic elections, rule of law, but it's too early to know right now whether that will be the case, unfortunately. But just an incredibly successful operation by the U.S. military, which demonstrates how it is by far the most effective, most powerful military force in the world. I mean, contrast this with what Putin did in Ukraine, which was savage, attempting to occupy a country rather than to capture a dictator, trying to subvert. But think about how it bogged down. None of Putin's objectives were accomplished. So it sends a powerful message to dictators like Putin or Khamenei in Iran that the United States is watching, that we're on the side of freedom and democracy, and this is America at her best.
Going off of Putin, my next question here, on an international scale, when we talk about China, Russia, could we see them intervening here? What can we expect on a global scale?
We can't, but Putin, we have to be careful. He is a Soviet KGB thug at heart. He's always seen the United States, the West, as his enemy. He sees democracy itself as its enemy. He is very deceptive. This is like part of his KGB training and thinking. He can use this as an excuse. He can use this as, look, the United States is doing this. What I am reassured by is that we had indictments, that we are going against indicted drug dealer. We're going against a man who was defeated in an election, who was a dictator, who's subverting democracy in Venezuela. That's very important for international legitimacy. When the United States is on the right side, we do our best. President Trump said some troubling statements referring to Canada and Greenland that were a little bit troubling. His relations with democracies in the Western world, even ones led by very conservative leaders, have sometimes been very acrimonious. When we are unified as the free world, we are the strongest. That is when America is at her best. That is when she is the strongest. And so we're on the right side. We're on the side of freedom. We're on the side of the Venezuelan people. And I think that's very important. China and Russia don't have the ability to intervene. Only the United States has that kind of global projection abilities. This can hopefully help send a message to the murderous, terroristic government in Tehran and help encourage them to leave power, or to let them know now is the time to leave, because we don't want the revolution in Iran to once again fail. The last revolution, of course, was a horrible one that was taken over by Islamic extremists that subvert and corrupt, Islam into some terrible form. And by the way, they violate traditional Shiite teaching. And that's another thing. It's a perversion of Shiite Islam and Islam in general, but they've killed so many Americans, Arabs, Iranians, Israelis, Europeans, etc., that government. So, obviously not knowing that this operation was going to happen overnight, I was expecting to talk on various networks about the fight for freedom in Iran. But this is a very related topic. This is America on the right side. I'm glad that President Trump chose to be on the side of the Venezuelan people. We're limited because obviously there are risks to getting bogged down. And the United States and the American people right now are particularly fearful of facing something like what we had happen in Iraq and Afghanistan, prolonged engagement. And there's always risks. Even if those wars didn't happen, that would be sensible to be cautious before being drawn into. We also had Vietnam that was very costly and was very difficult for the American people. So there is a very legitimate fear and also sometimes irrational fear because it's different. So that makes it a little challenging to move forward. So it appears likely that the Trump administration will limit this engagement to be safe, and also because of the current climate domestically, where there is actually, of course, war fatigue in the United States. Now, I think that Libya is different because they did not have developed civil society like I believe that Venezuela probably still has, even after Maduro's despotic rule and Chavez. And I think that this also suggests a legitimate question if the Bush administration didn't make a mistake and they couldn't have done something a little bit more like this than a full-scale massive invasion that basically took control of Iraq. It was, it was a noble cause, and we do have elections in Iraq, so I don't think it was a complete failure, but at a big cost to American lives, tragically, and Iraqi lives too. So I think this is going to be one of the issues for the Trump administration, wanting to limit our engagement, particularly on the ground in Venezuela.
All right, Michael, we've had you on here for quite a bit of time. We do appreciate you sticking with us. Is there anything else you'd like to add about this before we go? I'd like to remind our viewers once again that press conference with President Trump, 11 a.m. Eastern time, just about 3 hours away at this point. Anything you'd like to leave our viewers with here as we do await some answers to a lot of these questions?
It's just an incredibly well executed military operation. It should show everyone, especially hopefully our enemies, how effective the U.S. military is. And by arresting and capturing Maduro and his wife, it was done the right way, respecting our court system, working within the realm of our legal system and law, which is important. There are legitimate questions in terms of war powers and the constitutional authority. That's not entirely clear. It's a murky issue. A lot of people legitimately wouldn't want to create a Pandora's box where presidents could go anywhere, do whatever they want. There was not congressional authorization of any sort. That's something that cannot be ignored. There is a lot of precedent for what George H.W. Bush did in Panama. But like I said, an excellent, perfectly executed operation by the U.S. military, very impressive. And hopefully we find out that civilian casualties were really, really minimized, as well as casualties to American forces.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time this morning and jumping on early. We so appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Have a good morning.
You as well.